The rain came down in sheets over Hollowmere, a forgotten speck of a town where the streets wound like veins through a body long dead. Elias Kane sat alone in his workshop, surrounded by the relentless ticking of clocks, hundreds of them, each one a heartbeat he'd crafted with his own hands. The air smelled of oil and dust, and a single lantern cast jagged shadows across the walls. Elias was a man carved from sorrow, his face etched with lines deeper than his 42 years should have allowed. His wife, Mara, had died 3 winters ago, taken by a fever that no doctor could outrun, and since then, time had become his obsession. He built clocks to fill the silence she'd left behind, but they never brought her back. On this night, April 5th, 2025, the storm howled louder than usual, rattling the windows as if the world itself were trying to break in. Then came the knock. Elias froze, his screwdriver hovering over a half-finished pocket watch. No one visited him anymore, not since he'd turned away the last neighbor offering pity. The knock came again, sharp and insistent. He shuffled to the door, his boots scuffing the warped floorboards, and opened it to find no one, just a small, sodden package wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. Lightning split the sky as he bent to retrieve it, the rain soaking his graying hair. Back inside, he set it on his workbench, the clocks ticking in unison like a jury awaiting his verdict. His fingers trembled as he untied the twine, revealing a wooden box with carvings of twisting vines and strange, unreadable runes. Inside lay a clock unlike any he'd ever seen, brass and silver, its face etched with symbols instead of numbers, its hands frozen at midnight. A scrap of parchment fluttered out. Wind it once, and it begins. No signature, no explanation. Just those words, scrawled in ink that shimmered like oil on water. Curiosity gnawed at him. Elias had spent his life mastering time, or at least the illusion of it. He turned the clock over, inspecting its gears, which gleamed as if freshly forged. The winding key was cold to the touch, heavier than it should have been. He hesitated, the storm outside roaring like a warning, but the silence of his own existence pressed harder. With a slow twist, he wound it once. The air thickened. The rain stopped, not faded, but stopped, each drop hanging motionless outside the window like glass beads. The clocks on his walls fell silent, their hands stilled. His breath caught in his throat as he stepped to the door and pushed it open. Hollowmere was a painting, frozen mid-stroke, a cat mid-leap, a car's tires locked in a skid, the world trapped in a single, breathless moment. Elias laughed, a dry, cracked sound he hadn't heard from himself in years. He'd done it. He'd stopped time. The next hours were a blur of discovery. He wandered the streets, marveling at the stillness. He nudged a raindrop with his finger, watching it ripple but not fall. He stood before the town's old oak, its branches heavy with unmoving leaves, and felt a thrill he hadn't known since Mara's smile lit his days. Back in his workshop, he turned the key again, reversing the wind. Time snapped forward, rain crashed down, clocks resumed their chorus, and Hollowmere breathed again. But something was wrong. His reflection in a polished clock face showed a streak of silver in his hair that hadn't been there before. His knees ached as he stood, a faint tremor in his hands. The clock had taken something from him, a piece of his life traded for that frozen moment. He should have stopped then. He didn't. Days turned to weeks, and Elias experimented. He wound the clock to pause time and moved a child's tricycle from the path of a speeding truck, restarting the world to see her pedal safely away. He lingered in those still moments, watching the townsfolk like statues, their lives laid bare. Each use aged him, his beard whitened, his back stooped, but the power was intoxicating. He relived a memory, pausing time to sit beside Mara's grave and whisper the words he'd never said while she lived. "I should have fought harder for you," he murmured, tears blurring his vision as he unwound the clock and let her fade again. The townsfolk began to notice. Old Mrs. Harrow saw him catch a falling ladder before it crushed her son. Jimmy Tate swore Elias cheated at chess, moving pieces when no one blinked. Whispers grew into pleas. "Fix my mistake," they begged. Give me one more day with him. Elias wanted to help. He did, but every tick of that cursed clock carved years from his bones. Then came Mr. Varn. He appeared on a moonless night, his shadow stretching too long across the workshop floor. Dressed in a black coat that shimmered like wet ink, he had eyes that glinted yellow, like a predator's. "That clock is mine," he said, his voice a low rasp that made the air hum. "Return it or pay the price." Elias clutched the clock to his chest, defiance flaring. "It came to me. It's mine now." Varn smiled, thin and sharp. "You don't know what you've stolen, Cain. That clock was forged by a man who sold his soul to trap time itself. Every second you take, it takes from you and soon from others." Elias scoffed, but doubt gnawed at him. That night, he dreamed of Mara, her face pale and accusing, her voice echoing, "What have you done?" The truth hit when the flood came. Hollowmere's river swelled under weeks of rain, its banks bursting on a Sunday dawn. Elias watched from his window as water surged toward the town, families scrambling to escape. He could stop it. He had to. With shaking hands, he wound the clock, freezing the waves mid-crest, the screams mid-breath. He staggered through the streets, redirecting sandbags, pulling children to higher ground, his body screaming with every step. Hours passed in that timeless void, his hair falling out in clumps, his skin wrinkling like parchment. When he unwound the clock, the flood receded, the town spared. But Elias collapsed, a husk of a man, his breath shallow as applause rose from the crowd he'd saved. Mr. Varn returned that night. Elias, too weak to stand, watched as the stranger pried the clock from his gnarled fingers. "You've paid enough," Varn said, almost pitying. "Enjoy what's left." He vanished into the dark, the clock's ticking fading with him. Elias crawled to his porch, the storm quieting as dawn broke. He was old now, older than his years, but he smiled, tasting peace for the first time since Mara. The townsfolk called him a hero, but he knew the truth. He'd been a thief, borrowing time he couldn't keep. As he closed his eyes, the wind carried a faint tick-tock. He didn't need to look. The clock sat on his doorstep again, gleaming in the morning light, waiting for its next master.